Imagine a tropical island where you do not hear birds singing at night, where almost all the birds have disappeared, where silence has become the norm. Does it sound like the plot of a science fiction movie? Question mark. Yet this is the real story of the island of Guam in the Pacific Ocean. Just a few snakes that were accidentally brought in after the Second World War turned this island paradise into an ecological disaster on a planetary scale. Subscribe to the channel, it is only going to get more interesting from here. Guam is a small island in the western part of the Pacific Ocean, part of the Mariana Archipelago. Until the middle of the 20th century, this patch of land, with an area of only 540 square kilometers, was a true paradise for ornithologists. 12 bird species lived here that could not be found anywhere else on Earth. The island remained in relative isolation for a long time. Spanish colonization, followed by the presence of the United States, changed the lives of the local people, but the ecosystem stayed relatively stable. The birds felt free. They reproduced without major threats because Guam had almost no large predators. Everything changed after the Second World War. Guam became one of the most important United States military bases in the Pacific. Massive construction began. Military ships arrived along with airplanes and cargo vessels. Together with equipment and supplies, uninvited guests reached the island, among them brown tree snakes. The homeland of these reptiles is Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and northern Australia. There they are simply part of the ecosystem and do not stand out in any special way. The snake is medium-sized, usually 1 meter or 1.5 meters long, although some individuals can reach 3 meters. Its color is brown with crosswise bands, an ideal camouflage among tree branches. These snakes are nocturnal hunters. During the day, they hide in tree hollows, under bark, or in rock crevices, and when darkness falls, they come out to hunt. Their diet is varied: small mammals, lizards, and frogs, but most of all, they prefer birds and their eggs. They have a mild venom that is not dangerous for humans, but is deadly for small animals. Exactly how the snakes reached Guam is not known. The most likely version is that they arrived in cargo holds of military ships or transport aircraft. Some may have hidden in landing gear bays, and others in equipment crates. Just a few individuals were enough to trigger an ecological catastrophe. The first reports of unusual snakes on Guam appeared in the late 1940s. Local residents started noticing strange reptiles near houses, in trees, and even inside buildings. At first, no one paid much attention. Snakes are snakes, they thought. Many different things can wash up on an island. However, by the 1950s, the first alarming signs appeared. Residents began to notice that there were fewer birds. The morning chorus was no longer as loud, nests were empty, and chicks were found dead. At first, scientists blamed this on urbanization, clearing forests for military facilities and the use of pesticides. By the 1960s, the situation had become critical. Several bird species had completely disappeared from the southern part of the island. Ornithologists raised the alarm, and the first serious studies began. Then the shocking truth emerged. The culprit behind this entire nightmare was the brown tree snake. The snake population was growing at a geometric rate. In their native range, predators, diseases, and competitors keep their numbers in check. On Guam, there was nothing that could stop their spread. The absence of natural enemies, an abundance of food, and an ideal climate all combined to create perfect conditions for the snakes. By the 1970s, population density had reached incredible levels. In some areas, up to 5,000 snakes lived in a single hectare of forest. For comparison, in their native Papua New Guinea, their density rarely exceeds 50 individuals per hectare. Imagine 100 times more. Birds were dying en masse. Adult birds became prey at night while they slept on branches. Nests were completely destroyed. Eggs were eaten, and chicks did not live long enough to grow feathers. Even the species that nested in hollows could not escape, because the snakes are excellent climbers and can squeeze through any crack. By the 1980s, the situation looked apocalyptic. 10 of the 12 endemic bird species had completely vanished in the wild. The Guam rail, the Guam flycatcher, and the Micronesian kingfisher had all disappeared. Only in zoos did the last representatives of these species remain. The two remaining species, the Guam crow and the Mariana fruit dove, survived only thanks to captive breeding programs. In the wild, they also went extinct. The island sank into an eerie silence. Sunrises were no longer greeted with birdsong, and sunsets passed in dead quiet. Yet the disappearance of birds was only the beginning. Ecologists call this the domino effect, or a trophic cascade. When one link in the food chain disappears, the entire system begins to collapse. Birds on Guam played a key role. They pollinated plants, dispersed seeds, and controlled insect numbers. Without birds, spider populations began to explode. Imagine that in the forests of Guam, the amount of spider web increased 40-fold. Trees are literally wrapped in silk, like in a horror movie. Without their main enemy, spiders felt in control and multiplied enormously. The composition of the forest changed as well. Many trees depended on birds to spread their seeds. Birds ate the fruit, carried the seeds over long distances, and promoted plant diversity. Without them, some plant species stopped reproducing effectively, and their range began to shrink. The snakes did not limit themselves to birds. They turned to bats, lizards, and frogs. 2/3 of all lizard species on the island went extinct. Bat numbers dropped catastrophically. The island's ecosystem turned into a monoculture dominated only by snakes and insects. Unexpected technical problems also appeared. Snakes began climbing onto power lines, which caused short circuits. Every year, there were up to 200 power outages caused by snakes. The economic damage reached millions of dollars annually. Snakes entered houses, crawled into beds, and frightened children. Although their venom is not fatal to humans, their bites are painful and can trigger severe allergic reactions in children and older people. Life on the island turned into a constant struggle against reptiles. Authorities and scientists realized the scale of the disaster only in the 1980s, when it was already too late. Efforts to fight the snakes began, but how can you fight an enemy that is everywhere, hides during the day and hunts at night? The first methods were primitive: traps, manual capture, and cash rewards for killed snakes. Thousands of traps were set. These were simple tubes with bait inside and a sticky substance. A snake crawls in for a mouse, gets stuck, and cannot escape. Tens of thousands of individuals were caught each year, but this was a drop in the bucket. The population was so huge that traps could not reduce it in any meaningful way. Attempts were made to use hunting dogs. Specially trained terriers searched for snakes by scent. The method worked, but the scale of the problem required hundreds of dogs and non-stop work. It was physically impossible to comb the entire island, every tree, every bush, and every crevice. Authorities were afraid to use poisons. The island is small, and any toxins could harm the remaining wildlife, contaminate groundwater, and poison the soil. In addition, snakes are very cautious and do not readily take bait. They hunt live prey. A dead poisoned mouse does not interest them. So scientists came up with a method that was both brilliant and horrifying: parachuting poisoned mice. It sounds insane, but it is real. They took dead mice and stuffed them with acetaminophen, which is deadly toxic for snakes, but safe for most other animals. Small cardboard parachutes were attached to the mice. These mice were dropped from helicopters over the jungle. The parachute catches in the tree branches, so the mouse hangs at the right height where the snakes hunt. A snake finds the prey, swallows it, and dies from poisoning within a few hours. The method showed some effectiveness, but requires enormous resources. The problem spread to neighboring islands as well. The snakes learned to travel on ships and airplanes in exactly the same way they once reached Guam. There were documented cases of snakes being found in Hawaii, on Okinawa, and on other Pacific islands. Each time an alarm was raised and an emergency search and eradication campaign began. Authorities introduced extremely strict quarantine controls. Every vessel leaving Guam is inspected by special teams with dogs. Aircraft are checked before departure. Cargo is scanned and examined. At the slightest suspicion, a flight is delayed. The cost of a mistake is too high. Any other island could repeat the fate of Guam. Scientists began to explore the possibility of biological control. Perhaps they could introduce natural enemies of the snakes to the island. However, the track record of introducing foreign species is grim. Remember cane toads in Australia or mongooses in Hawaii. Each time this led to a new ecological problem. There were attempts at male sterilization. The idea was to release sterile snakes into the wild so they would mate with females but produce no offspring. In theory, this should gradually reduce the population. In practice, it turned out to be unrealistic to capture and sterilize enough snakes to have any real effect. Genetic methods were also considered. Could scientists create a gene that makes offspring non-viable? Or one that produces only males? The technology is developing, but the public fears genetic modification and the consequences could be unpredictable. What about the birds? Captive breeding programs produced results. Guam rails were successfully bred in zoos. By 2010, the captive population had reached 200 individuals. However, releasing them back onto Guam is impossible. The snakes would wipe them out instantly. The birds began to be reintroduced to neighboring islands where there are no snakes. On Rota and Cocos Island, populations of Guam rails have been established. It is not quite the same. The birds live outside their native environment, but at least they are alive, and the species survives. The Micronesian kingfisher was also saved from complete extinction. In 2002, a group of 29 birds was released on Palmyra Atoll. They adapted and began to breed. Now, about 50 individuals live there. It is a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The Guam flycatcher turned out to be the hardest species to breed. It was last seen in the wild in 1983. In captivity, only one female remained, and all attempts to get offspring from her failed. In 1987, she died. The species disappeared forever. The story of Guam has become a classic case study of invasive species in ecology. Students around the world study it and textbooks describe it. It is a lesson in how a single species can destroy an entire ecosystem and how important every part of the natural balance is. The economic losses caused by the snakes are enormous. Tourism suffered. Who wants to vacation on an island with no birds and snakes everywhere? Agriculture also took a hit. Without birds, pests reproduce without control. Plant pollination has been disrupted and yields of some crops have declined. Military bases bear huge costs in the fight against snakes. Every airplane is inspected before takeoff, and every ship is examined. Power lines must constantly be repaired and upgraded. The damage is estimated at millions of dollars each year. One interesting fact is that the snakes on Guam have become larger than their relatives in their native range. With plenty of food and no predators, they can grow up to 3 meters long. On the mainland, such sizes are rare. Evolution moves quickly when conditions are favorable. Scientists have noticed changes in snake behavior as well. They have become bolder, approach people more often, and are less afraid of light. Generations that grew up without threats from predators have lost their natural caution. They feel like the masters of the island. The problem of Guam is not unique. Around the world, invasive species damage ecosystems. Rats on islands in New Zealand, rabbits in Australia, and pythons in Florida are just a few examples. Each story is tragic in its own way, but the mechanism is the same. A foreign species without natural enemies destroys the balance. What could have been done to prevent the disaster? Strict quarantine control back in the 1940s. Inspection of all cargo arriving on the island. Rapid response when the first snakes were detected. Mass trapping and eradication before the population grew. However, in those years, environmental awareness was low. No one thought about the consequences of introducing foreign species. Quarantine measures were weak, and inspections were almost non-existent. The world still did not understand how fragile island ecosystems are. The situation is different now. International agreements regulate the movement of biological materials. Quarantine services operate worldwide, yet the threat remains. Globalization, increased trade, and tourism all open new routes for alien species to spread. The struggle continues on Guam. Hundreds of thousands of snakes are captured every year. Tons of poisoned mice are dropped. Every vessel is checked. Yet the snake population remains stable. They reproduce faster than humans can destroy them. There is some encouraging news. In some areas of the island where efforts are particularly intense, snake numbers have declined. The first signs of recovery for certain animal species have appeared. Lizards and frogs have started to return. Scientists are developing new methods. Traps with pheromones that mimic the scent of female snakes are being tested. Electronic repellents are under development. Drones with thermal cameras are used to detect snakes in the tree canopy. Technology is advancing and new options are emerging. One idea under consideration is to create a snake-free zone in a small part of the island. There, conservationists could attempt to restore the ecosystem and reintroduce birds. This would require enormous effort, construction of a physical barrier, and constant monitoring. But it is possible. The story of Guam is not just a tale about snakes and birds. It is a story about how human activity can have unpredictable and catastrophic consequences. We move cargo around the globe, build and develop, yet often forget about nature. The residents of Guam live with this problem every day. They have grown used to the absence of birds, to snakes in their homes, and to power outages. The younger generation does not even remember what birdsong at dawn sounds like. For them, silence is normal. Old-timers tell stories about what the island used to be like, how birds sang in the mornings, and how the tree crowns were full of life. These memories sound like fairy tales to children who were born into a world without birds. The ecological disaster changed not only nature but also the local culture. If this story has made you think about the fragility of nature and the importance of treating the environment responsibly, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you do not miss new videos about the most amazing and instructive stories from the world of wildlife. Share in the comments how, in your opinion, similar ecological disasters can be prevented in the future.